Well, good afternoon, and for those of you further west, good morning. Welcome to our webinar. Today's session is featured around structured product labeling, and specifically the do's and don'ts of structured product labeling. And we'll also spend a little bit of time on a new FDA mandate around drug sample reporting. My name's Brian Trombley, and I'm the National Sales Director at Data Conversion Laboratory. And I work very close with my colleague Howard Shatz, who's presenting today. Howard is DCL's SPL project manager, and he's been with DCL since 1991. He's been very active in the SPL space since its development began around 2003. He's an active member of the SPL working group, which is composed of pharmaceutical companies and conversion vendors like DCL, and he's a frequent contributor to the SPL working group Wiki discussion forum. Howard serves on the process communications, establishment registration, drug listing, and OTC sub-teams, and he also comes to us with a BS in computer science from New York University. Prior to joining DCL, Howard was an account manager with EDS. Just quickly, I want to go through the agenda, and I'll touch on a couple of topics. The agenda for today, we'll spend just a moment on a little bit about Data Conversion Laboratory and what we do. We'll talk briefly on what our life sciences offerings are, and then most of the time we'll spend with what's new in SPL for 2012, the SPL Do's and Don'ts, and the Affordable Care Act Section 6004 drug sample reporting mandate, and there'll be ample time at the end of the session for Q&A. So very briefly, Data Conversion Laboratories, we've been in the business of converting data for customers for over 31 years now at this point, and most of that in recent history has been XML related, and you know, as SPL is an XML format, that's the basis for this this discussion today. We're a privately held, woman-owned small business. We're headquartered in New York City. We have a dedicated team that's focused exclusively on our SPL services, and we're extending that now to drug sample reporting services. We have expertise in large, complex conversion projects, substantial experience in managing multiple vendors for large projects with automated tracking and reporting capabilities. And we employ sophisticated quality control workflow with both automated and human quality control steps to guarantee accuracy. Our life sciences offerings, in the case of most of the folks on this call, are focused around pharmaceutical. We have quite a range of clients that rely on us day in and day out for assistance with their structured product labeling, conversion, and submissions. We offer SPL consulting and training. And a new offering, which we'll talk about towards the end of this, is our ACA 6004 drug sample reporting, conversion, and submissions. We also work with quite a few pharmaceutical companies around the areas of technical and compliance document management. So that might be quality and process documentation, helping them both create strategies to manage that content, also to help them as they move between different technologies to author and to deliver that content. We also offer data conversion services in that space as well. Howard, I'm going to turn it over to you now, and maybe you can start the meat of the presentation.
Okay, thank you very much, Brian. I'm starting with this what's new in SPL for 2012, and there's actually a number of things that are new, but I've highlighted the document types. These are document types that have been made available by the FDA, and people either don't know that they're around, or if they do know that they're around, they're not quite sure what to do with them. So just briefly, I want to go through these four in particular. And in the course of the do's and don'ts, I'm going to be talking about things related to the drug product information that has changed with SPL in 2012. But I just want to present that in the context of how do you get the data into SPL? Okay, so the 4 document types that I highlight here are the dietary supplement. That's to be used for companies that wish to register their dietary supplements with SPL. It's been no change in the reporting requirements on this, but if you want to do so, to list the dietary supplement, you can do so. The second type is the establishment deregistration, and this falls into the category of establishment registration family of documents. You're probably all familiar by now with the requirement to register your establishments annually using SPL. And the question becomes, if you're a registrant and you own establishments, you've registered them with the FDA, and for whatever reason, all of the establishments that you own are no longer manufacturing drug products for the U.S. market. You don't want them subject to FDA inspection. There is no need for an FDA inspection. How do you notify the FDA about that? Well, you can now use this establishment deregistration form. Previously, if you were in that position, you had to file the out-of-business notification document type, and that was irksome to companies that were still in business. They just weren't reporting to the FDA. So they established this new document type so that you can tell the FDA, I'm no longer doing drug manufacturing that requires inspection, but we're still in business. The next type is the NDC Labeler Code Inactivation. This is in order to deactivate an NDC Labeler Code. If a company no longer has any drug products in the market, they're all past their expiration date, so none of them need to be listed with the FDA, and you're not planning on using that labeler code anymore, you can submit this form, the labeler code inactivation, and that tells the FDA that that labeler code is no longer being used. The last one is a very simple one, where previously the document type that you submitted to request a labeler code or to modify the information for the labeler code, you filed the NDC Labeler Code Request form. They have changed that name. You can still use NDC Labeler Code Request as a document type, but only until July 1st. On July 1st and thereafter, the document type in your SPL file must read NDC NHRIC Labeler Code Request. That's just purely a name change, no practical submission differences other than that. The next part will go through the SPL Dos and Don'ts, and I'm going to go through the different types of information that you need to include in your SPL. I'm also going to talk briefly about package images, and we're going to close that part of the presentation with 2 pages of SPL links and FDA contacts that we have found useful. And if you want a copy of these links, you can contact us, contact me, contact Brian. Our contact information will be appearing at the end. The presentation will be written from the standpoint, for those who are DCL clients, it's written using the SPL workbook that we use. If you're using, for those of you using a different conversion vendor or using another software tool, you can still relate the information here to the information that I'm presenting, because this is really designed to present to you what we've learned both through SPL validation rules and through experience, mistakes people make when they enter the form. So this is really presented as a public service just to enlighten you as to what you should be doing when you fill out these forms. I should add that some of the don'ts and also some of the do's that are presenting are not necessarily required by the FDA or not necessarily in violation of an FDA rule, but it might generate what I call the letter from Lonnie, which is the manual check that they do in the SPL, and they will tell you, for example, oh, the basis of strength is the active moiety, and it's not the active ingredient. And without further ado, I will start that. And again, I'm sure you'll have questions, but please check off that question box, submit the question. Vincent Donadio is monitoring this, and during our Q&A part of the presentation, we will go over those questions. The establishment registration, you need to submit one every year. That's a regulatory requirement. For revision date, we suggest you use today's date, where it asks you for the FEI number. If you have one, fill it in. If you don't have one, it's a new plan from the FDA standpoint or from your standpoint, and it does not yet have the FEI number, then leave it blank. But just be aware that leaving it blank means that the FDA will assign one. So if you already have one, you just don't have it as you're filling out the form, please try to get it so you make life easier for the FDA. New for this, well, it's new for about a year now, is enter the company name and address as it is found in Dun & Bradstreet. I'm sure many of you have gone through the experience of registering an establishment. The FDA doesn't like it because the company name doesn't match or the address doesn't match. You've got to make sure you have the right information. You can request a manual override if you're certain you have the right information and Dun & Bradstreet does not. Work with Dun & Bradstreet to get the information corrected. And there are plans to try to make this a less stressful step in the process, but there have been no official announcements as to what they have planned for this, so I can't really speak more about that. But the FDA is aware that companies have a big problem with this, and it's being addressed by both the FDA and Dun & Bradstreet. Do list all applicable operations for an establishment. What happens here is that if you register for, or if you don't register for a particular operation and somebody puts that plant on their drug listing as an establishment with a particular operation, they will get a validation error because they don't have because you haven't registered for that operation. If you're doing analysis and you don't tell the FDA you're doing analysis, so anybody for whom you're doing analysis, if they try to drug list and say XYZ is doing analysis for us, they're going to get a validation error, and they'll probably get upset with you that you haven't told the FDA about that. If you are a foreign establishment outside the United States, you must enter a U.S. agent, and one and only one U.S. agent for that foreign establishment. So it's both it's a case of many of the validation rules, an example of many of the validation rules. With the FDA in the validation rules, they're just enforcing the regulations. Regulations require that a foreign establishment register with a U.S. agent, so you include a U.S. agent. Enter as many importers that are known for a foreign establishment. You don't need to list any importers, but the regulations require that you include all known importers. So we recommend that you do that. Enter all contact information for each establishment, and just be aware that all fields are required. The only exception is state and zip code or postal code, which depends on the country. But if you're in the United States, you must have a state and you must have a zip code. And you need to include the country code in the telephone number. Even if you're in the United States, if you don't include that +1 at the beginning, that's a validation error. What you cannot do, and this is a rule, this is a validation rule, is submit a registration prior to the year it is effective. It used to be in the paper world that in December of the prior year, you could submit your registration for the following year. No longer. If you want to submit your registration in 2012, you must wait until January 1st, 2012. and you cannot submit it after December 31st, 2012. You will not be in compliance with the 2012 registration if you do that. Don't omit the DUNS number. They require the DUNS number for each establishment. And this has been a problem for the FDA where people are including establishments that are not owned by the registrant. You don't register an establishment unless you own it. If an establishment is, if you are partners with another company that owns an establishment, and together these two companies have a partnership that owns the establishment, it's the partnership that has to register the establishment, not the individual companies that comprise the partnership. Moving on to the NDC Labeler Code. It's for labeler codes already registered using SPL. You submit again only when the information has changed. In other words, you must, before you can do your first drug listing submission for a particular that has a labeler code, particular labeler code in it, that labeler code has to be registered using SPL. I'd imagine that by this point, most of you who have existing labeler codes have already registered using SPL. Once you've done that, you're set for that labeler code unless the information changes. If contact information changes or if it's assigned to a different company, then you need to file a revision to that. For revision date, we suggest use today's date. To get a new labeler code, you complete the SPL without filling in the labeler code and submit the SPL. Once you get the labeler code, then you take that exact same file. Don't change anything in the file. Just add the labeler code that you've been assigned and resubmit it, and you should be good to go. Enter all the information we put in the worksheet. The state and zip codes are left blank if not applicable. As before, it is required for the United States, but there are exceptions for foreign countries. And always include the +1, the country code and the telephone number, including the +1 for the United States. Don't omit the DUNS number, and don't enter more information than is asked for. It hasn't been a problem lately, but at the beginning, people said, "Oh, but I want to put in a company address for the labeler, or I want to put in a second email address." You can't do that. Okay, it's not that you don't have to; it's you cannot. For the labeler code, they just want the company name and the DUNS number. The FDA can then, with that, the company can then look up the company address. They don't need for you to tell them the company address because it's already in Dun & Bradstreet. And similarly for the email address, the general recommendation we make to clients is that for the contact information, where you fill in the email address, fill in an email address if your system allows it. Use an email address that goes to multiple people within your company. So, for example, at DCL, if you send something to DCL SPL at dclab.com, it goes to about 15 people, I think. I haven't counted, but it goes to everybody on the DCL SPL team. We suggest you do this. This way, if the contact person for the labeler code or same thing for the establishments, if they're on vacation, then somebody else, and not getting emails, then they can, the email will still go to somebody else within the company, and you'll be covered to see why the FDA is contacting you. For the submission type, the revision date, and the label information that you enter, use the appropriate submission types. They've been adding more and more, and they added more in 2011. They've added more in 2012. Use the revision date appropriate for your label. The date is used as a revised date at the end of the highlight section as well as at the end of the label. And the FDA prefers that the date at the end of the highlight section is the date of approval of the highlight section. That's really between the FDA reviewer and the sponsor. That has become an issue, that if they change, if you've made a simple change to the label and your label now says as of March 2012, but the label itself, the highlight section, was approved in November of 2011, the FDA wants the approval, the revision date that you see, both in the highlights and because of the way SPL works, at the end of the label, they want it to see as of November 2011. Complete the registrant. Now, here's where there's, again, it's not a validation rule, but the intent of the registrant field when you do a drug product listing label is for the manufacturer to fill themselves in if they are filling in the SPL on behalf of the labeler, which is a separate company. So if company ABC is the labeler and company XYZ does the manufacturing and XYZ does the SPL, the FDA wants XYZ to fill themselves in as a registrant as well as an establishment. If ABC, the labeler, fills in the SPL themselves, they leave the registrant blank. Here at DCL, if they're both the same, if the label and the registrant are the same, we just leave it out. Again, that's a best practice for the FDA. And if you look at the step-by-step instructions from the FDA, that's just how they tell you to do it. Don't omit a DUNS number, and don't complete the registrant field if the registrant is the same as the labeler. Okay, now moving on to the next slide, the proprietary and establishment names. You need to fill in a proprietary name as well as an establishment name. Now, you may be manufacturing a generic drug. You don't have a proprietary name. Use the established name as the proprietary name as well. And the established name normally is created by just using the active ingredients. Don't create your own name. There are exceptions, especially when you come to biological products, vaccines and the like. But generally, when you look at an SPL R4, you will see that the established name reflects the names of the active ingredients. It's just basically a list of the active ingredients separated by a comma or the word "and" or something like that. Don't use symbols. That's a validation rule. They simply do not allow it. Don't use indications of dosage, form, strength, or route of administration. You can. It is allowed, but you may run into problems. That's where the FDA may issue a letter from Lonnie, or what I call the letter from Lonnie, saying we don't like this in the name. But if you go onto the site, they do have it, and they do allow it, but there's no firm rules as to when they allow it and when they don't like it. And use anything other than an active ingredient name and connector in the established name. That's just a repeat, basically, of what I explained before. Okay, when it comes to active and inactive ingredients, here there's been a major change in 2012, and there will be another change related to it further down the road in 2012. The FDA has not said when it will happen. But you do need to include the strength for each active ingredient. You include the uni for all active ingredients, whether they're active or inactive, unless this is an approval listing. If you're just submitting SPL to go along with an approval submission, you don't need to include it. We have the link to get you to the uni search page. But be aware that the FDA validates the unis against its own list. So there are some differences between what names the FDA wants to see for the unis versus what names you will find on the uni search page. They're few and far between, but we do want you to be aware of that, and we give you the link, we show you the link there to their own list. And do use the preferred substance name. When you go to the uni search page, it'll tell you what the preferred substance name is, so that's what you should use. When you look at this the FDA validation list that I referred to, that only has preferred substance name. But on the uni search page, you can search by however you have the ingredient. Don't use, when it comes to being percentages for strength, don't use percentages for strength, and strength must be a ratio. And don't use your own name for the ingredient again. And reiterating, a lot of these things you'll find are repetitious, but just trying to make sure that you don't make mistakes in filling out the information. Okay, now where the big change comes in is when you have the active ingredient and you're expressing the strength, whether it's you need to specify whether it's the strength in terms of the active ingredient or the strength in terms of the active moiety. You do have to include an active moiety for each active ingredient. Include the unit for all ingredients for all moieties. That should reword that. And the FDA currently validates the units against its own list. Repeating that. Use the preferred substance, same as the name of the moiety. It's usually the active moiety is the active ingredient. There are exceptions. And here's where the new change. The FDA has made available a spreadsheet which will show for the active ingredients that they have, for which they have identified the active moiety. They tell you, here's the active ingredient, here's the active moiety. The FDA is not, this is a major job. They haven't done all active ingredients yet, but they're updating the file weekly. I haven't verified that they're actually doing it weekly, but they said they were going to do it weekly. In terms of our own worksheet, what you do is to indicate that the active moiety is the basis of strength, is you put curly braces around the active moiety. And just be aware that if those of you who haven't already found out the hard way, the FDA is manually validating the active moiety and basis of strength for an active ingredient. So they're looking at what you fill in as the active ingredient and what you say is the basis of strength, the active ingredient, and what the actual strength is. And they're verifying, they're at least making sure that the active, that the basis of strength is correctly stated as to whether it's the active ingredient or the active moiety. They are also checking, but this is not in the spreadsheet, they are also checking to make sure that the value that you use for the strength is correctly stated. They want the value of the strength stated in terms of its value in a clinical setting, and there are differences there. There could be differences. Don't include counter ions in active moiety. That's a validation error. And again, as they expand this worksheet, and eventually they're going to have an automatic validation to make sure that the basis of strength of the active ingredient is correctly stated as being either the active ingredient or the active moiety. But if you include a counter ion in the active moiety, that's a validation error. They have a list of terms that are substances that are typically counter ions, and if they find that stated in the active moiety, that they'll tell you that that'll be an automatic validation error. This one is a very simple one, the DEA schedule. Use the pull-down menu. We provide you the pull-down menus. There's a list of the SPL resource page that you'll be seeing that at the end of this presentation. But if you go to the SPL resource page, you can see what all the choices are, and don't use your own terminology. In the case of the DEA schedule, I don't think we've ever run into a problem with that. People know that. But for other lists, you have to make sure to use the right lists. For the product characteristics, you need to provide the product characteristics for a solid dosage form, such as a tablet or a pill, a tablet or capsule. I think that pill is now available. The color and the shape vocabulary requires that you use FDA terms, but they also have some XML tagging which gives you the flexibility of putting in your own term for color and shape in addition to the control terms that the FDA uses. So in our worksheet we explain how to do that. In other forms you have to just be aware of how you do that. And the product characteristics, we haven't had a problem with this in a long time, but the size of the item is the size in metric units. It's the longest dimension of the object. And as Dr. Randy Levin of the FDA has said, if you don't know what it is, take out a ruler and measure. Okay. Don't omit the FDA terms for color and shape. Again, those You can use your own terms, but only in addition to those terms. Don't use anything other than a whole number for size, and don't use anything other than letters and numbers in an imprint. You know, if you have a copyright symbol or a registered symbol or anything like that, you can't put it in. And don't try to describe it. If you're going to, let's say you have a stylized V in there, don't put stylized V. Just put V in there. And if you have something such as a copyright symbol that you can't reproduce, or it's, then use a semicolon as a placeholder for it, if you will. Okay, in terms of the packaging, you should enter every level of packaging from the outermost to the innermost. In our worksheet, you fill in the outermost container if there's just one. Fill in only the outermost container if there's just one level of packaging. If we have our tablets in a bottle, just where we ask for the outermost container, that's where it goes. And if you have two levels of packaging in terms of our worksheet, put it into outermost and level 2. And similarly for level 1, if there are 3 levels of packaging, there are provisions before you can have more than 3 levels of packaging for this, but just make sure you cover all of them. The outermost packaging, sometimes the FDA, it's up to you. If people have a bottle in a carton, it's not required that you do the carton as a level of packaging. That's your own call, subject to whatever the FDA drug registration people have to say about it. But it's not necessarily required that you put in something like a carton. That's a very basic thing. They're not really serving any purpose other than some convenience. Don't use your own terms for container type. Don't use the same NDC at different levels. Both, you have to use the terms for container type used by the FDA, and you can only have one. An NDC has to be unique for each for the label. And so if you have 1234-1234-55, then and that's what your outermost container is. That's the only place you can do it is on the outermost container. Don't omit the outermost container set of rows if needed. Okay, don't omit the NDC for the outermost container. The outermost container must contain an NDC. And if you have 3 levels of packaging, in terms of our worksheet, don't. I don't know how it works in the validation rules, but we're not happy if you fill in level 1 but a mid-level 2. We expect that once you have the inner packages start to have NDCs, we expect that each level will have an NDC. The packaging information for a level provide the following information: the container type, the quantity, and this is really geared for our worksheet, but again, however you're doing the SPL, this is applicable. You have to say what the quantity is in the container, the NDC code if applicable. NDC, the outermost must always have one, but the others do not. However, this is an important change. This was been for a few months now. For those of you who have CBER products, please be aware that they are requiring a unique NDC at each level of packaging. So please be aware of that. Don't use your own terms for container type. Don't use the same NDC at different levels. Don't omit the outermost container set of rows. Don't omit this is basically a repeat, and we can move on to the next one. For the marketing information, you enter the product status as active when the product, which now there's different terminologies. To the FDA, a product is the Labeler Code product code combination. And as long as that product is available in any package configuration, you're marketing a product with a particular Labeler Code product code combination, the product is active if it's still being manufactured. It's completed when the product is no longer being manufactured in any packaging configuration. So the mistake people make is if they have 2 labels which for the same product, but they have a bottle of 100 and they have a bottle of 30, and maybe they have it as 2 separate labels. and they've stopped making the 30, and they submit it with a product status of completed and an end date, so that they can delist that configuration. Well, that's a mistake. It's completed only when the product is no longer being manufactured in any packaging configuration. If you're still marketing it with 100 tablets in the bottle, then the product should not be delisted just yet. Enter the appropriate start marketing date. We're going to talk about that in the next slide. Enter the marketing category using the pull-down menu. You need to know whether it's an OTC, monograph final, not final, an ANDA, and so on and so forth. But again, it's controlled terminology, so you have to use only the categories the FDA makes available. Enter the application or citation number when the marketing category is anything except bulk ingredient, export only, IND, dietary supplement, or an unapproved category. But the other categories all need to have some sort of application or citation number. Don't use your own terms for product status or category, and don't enter a start marketing date that's not specific. For example, 2010XXXX does not specify a month and date and is therefore not allowed. In the case of approval submissions where it's not really critical what you put there for the start marketing date, it needs to be all zeros in order to render properly. Okay, in terms of the start marketing date, now here I'm going to be giving you information that's not on the slide because it's not fully documented, but it's been stated by the FDA, specifically Lonnie Smith. But the first item is that the start marketing date is the date the file is released to the public, such as to the Daily Med. I say such as to the Daily Med because within the FDA, they have a separate site, labels.fda.gov, that also has these labels, as well as commercial companies that have the SPL files. Nobody gets it until it doesn't go out to the public until that start marketing date is reached. So enter a reasonable date if the product is on the market. They're not researching to see if it's really the exact date. Our recommendation is, if you know for sure, if you're within 2 weeks of releasing a product and you know for sure that's the date, put that date in to get it listed and be made public within 2 weeks. If it's 6 months from now, put a date far in the future, 2030, let's say. The reason for that recommendation, as a couple of our clients have already experienced, they were certain the date was going to be the date it was released, and on the date of release or the day before the expected date of release, there was a decision made to delay the introduction or maybe not to market the product, and they were stuck because the wheels were already in motion, and on that day, boom, the thing goes public. They had to delist it. So our recommendation, DCL's recommendation on that basis is, don't expect everything is going to go right, but just put in, don't put in a real date until you're sure that nothing can go wrong. And to enter the end marketing date, this last item tells you how to do it using our spreadsheet, but the point is, if you say the marketing status is completed, you must include an end marketing date, and once the end marketing date is reached, the product will be pulled from public accessibility, such as the Daily Med. Just as an aside, the Daily Med doesn't ever fully remove something. They have archives, and if something is taken off of the regular Daily Med section where you can look for things, it'll go into archives. And if you go into archives, there's a separate search method for that. And if you know what the product name is, you can still see it. You can see the last listing for that. The aside that I'm doing is at the FDA on their SPL resource page, you can download all of the drugs that have been listed using SPL, and they associate a marketing date and an end date with each package configuration, and they're doing that based on the marketing date for the products. And so if you submit a label with let's say 2 packaging configurations, and then on May 1st you revised the label and you took out 1 packaging configuration, the FDA will assume that that was the date that that packaging configuration was removed from the was no longer available in the marketplace. But the implications of that are just on this. The known implications are just if somebody looks at this list of products that are available from the FDA to download, it may be that the Center for Medicare or Medicaid Services may start making use of that, but that's not an official position of the FDA. But it has been mentioned that that's a it's a possibility. So just be aware that the start marketing date has implications, and adding and removing packaging configurations from a label will also have implications, at least on the FDA's on the list of drugs available through the download. Don't enter a start or end marketing date that is not specific, and again, this is really for if you're doing a real listing. The establishment information, you list all establishments. What's very new is that as of July 1st, you'll have to list these things by product. And so if it's a CEDAR submission, you have to specify. You can't just say, here are all the establishments that are involved in manufacturing any product in the label. Each product, each establishment will have to have the products associated with it. If it's a CBER submission, you can do it that way, or you can do it the way you've been doing it all along and just tell them, here are all the establishments that are involved in manufacturing any of the products. For CVM, you cannot do it that way. You must do it the way you're doing it now. They don't want to know establishments by product. If you only have 1 product in the label, there's no issue here. I mean, that's very straightforward for you. But if you have multiple products, just be aware that you have to make sure you have the right establishment for the right product. And do include a DUNS number for each establishment. And we point you to the Decker site if you want to check to see that the site is at least registered. If they're not registered in 2012 or 2011, they will not be on that site, and you will get a validation error. The operations, you list all the operations for establishment in the operations cell in our worksheet. Whether or not the site is registered for a particular operation is not publicly known. So you may get, if you list the establishment as doing analysis and it's not registered for analysis, you will get a validation error. But you can only do that. The only way to know that you're going to get a validation error is to actually submit the file. And don't omit a DUNS number when you put down the establishments. On the package images, they need to be, just be aware they need to be legible. The other rule that the FDA has, it should fit on the screen. You shouldn't need to scroll across a typical PC monitor. And it can be broken into multiple images for legibility and size on the screen. If you have one of these large packages and you're having problems making it both legible and small enough to fit on the screen, the FDA does allow you to have multiple images for that one section. That's the extent of it. The images are subject to manual checking by the FDA. They may or may not go through. You may get a letter from Lonnie if it's not legible, but but I know that if you go on to the Daily Med, you'll see images. I don't think you'll see images that require a great deal of scrolling, but there might be a little bit of scrolling on a regular PC monitor. But in terms of the legibility issue, I've seen stuff that they allow through that, and if you were to ask me, is that legible, an I and an L running together, or 2 L's I should say, running together, to me is not, or an I and an L rather, running together, to me is not legible if it looks like one solid block. But it is just a manual check that the FDA does, and there is some variation. But we at DCL, we try to make sure that it really is very legible. And be aware, when we talk about a typical PC monitor, the daily med labels can be downloaded to smartphones. So, you have all sorts of PDAs floating around, and you want those images to be useful on those types of screens as well. So be aware of that. Now, by the way, I do want to mention on the legibility side that one of the explanations given to me by the FDA as to what is this whole thing about being legible is they want healthcare providers who don't have the physical box in front of them or whatever the container is. They want to be able to see what it looks like, and they want to be able to read the information that's there. So it's not just some FDA validation rule. There is a purpose to it. It's to make things easier for the healthcare providers and the proper treatment of patients. So I don't need to get on a soapbox to defend the FDA, but I just thought it's useful if you know what the thinking is behind this. The next two slides, I'll have it here for a few seconds. But here is our DCL SPL page has many of these links. There's the SPL resource page, which has many other links. The SPL working group wiki, we recommend that to get the most current information as well. And they also have a forum, and people go up there. They talk about X forms. They talk about SPL requirements. Very, very interesting things that go on there, and very useful to search that for your own questions. The Daily Med, of course, the FDA Online Label Repository. What used to be called the DFAR site is now the Decker site, Drug Establishment's Current Registration site. Used to be the Drug Firm Annual Registration Status site, but same thing. FDA Substance Registration search page, that's to see what the UniSearch page has. The regulations, if you want to see those, because again, a lot of these SPL validation rules are tied to the federal regulations, so you can search for those regulations online. There are drug nomenclature monographs that link to that provide you with links to monographs that define FDA terms, but these are existing documents that the FDA has available. The terms that are used are not necessarily the terms they want you to use in SPL, but at least it gives you some documentation, because the terms that they have are not, the meaning behind the terms in the FDA of what's a box versus what's a carton is not available through the normal SPL site, but you can see here what the intent is. If you have OTC drugs, you want to check on the OTC rulemakings, Pragmatic Data Validator Lite. Your SPL file has to be valid. If you want to test your SPL file before submission, this is the site to go to. It gets 90–95% of the errors that the full FDA validator will get, but it will not get things like set ID errors or things or NDCs that are found in other SPL files. The SPL group, that's the main contact for questions relating to the technical side of SPL for the FDA. But if you have regulatory questions, you're changing your proprietary name and you don't want to have to change your NDC code, contact the Drug Registration Listing System people to discuss that. Lonnie Smith monitors his main contact at the SPL group. He really focuses on the technical requirements, but when things are regulatory questions, you can feel free to contact the regulatory group directly. The FDA Active Ingredient Moiety relationship is at that site. To get it, it's a link. Click on the link, you open the zip file, and you open the spreadsheet. I can't give you the direct link to the spreadsheet name because that can change over time as they update it. And it's not, okay, I was having trouble moving it forward. So that ends the SPL portion of this. Again, we'll have questions at the end, and the timing is good here. So we have a few slides to talk about the ACA 6004. So basically, this is a legislation passed by Congress as part of the Affordable Care Act. It's specifically Section 6004. And beginning with April 1st, 2012, it's requiring that manufacturers and distributors of human prescription drugs report annually to the FDA by April 1st the identity and quantity of the drug samples that were distributed by the manufacturer and distributor in the prior year. Now, this is information that was already required to be collected by the manufacturers and distributors, but now it needs to be reported to the FDA. And the information is by practitioner at a particular address, and it's an aggregate number for the year for each drug. And by drug, I mean drug name and strength. Okay, and on the next sheet is just a summary of what information they're looking for. First name, middle initial, and last name, the address, broken out by line 1, line 2, city, state, and zip for the practitioner. The professional designation, again, this is a control terminology list, you know, MD for medical doctor and so on for the other, I forget, there are 100-something abbreviations on there. And for each strength of a product that was requested, they want to know the trade name and dosage, and I'm using the example straight out of the user guide, out of the FDA user guide. Synthroid 0.1 milligrams, size and type of the packaging, 100 tablets in one bottle, the total number of packages requested, the confirmation that the signature for the request is available. If the practitioner has the sample sent to another site, such as a hospital, where he's actually going to use it, then who signed for it? They want to know the name and address of the person who signed for the package. If it's not the practitioner, the total number of packages that were actually distributed, and confirmation that the signature for the receipt of the packages is available. The drug sample reporting requires that the information that we just described is submitted to the FDA through their gateway, just like an SPL file is. Well, there are different rules for naming the files and the like, but what's in common with SPL is that it goes through the gateway, and it is an XML file. It's not an SPL file. It's a separate, a much simpler schema, but it goes through the gateway. And while the legislation requires that it start with April 1st, 2012, that the information be submitted to the FDA no later than that date for a particular year, the FDA will not object until October 1st to a late submission. So they can't change the legislation. The legislation is what it is, but they will have said, and it's right on their site, that they will not object until October 1st to a late submission. And the way we can help with the ACA is we'll look to see how you have your data. Now, we suspect a lot of you have it electronically already. So we'll see if we can use it as is. In other words, if you can provide us with a workbook for a worksheet, for example, or a CSV file, comma separated values, text file that just uses commas to separate the different fields that are required, we'll take that and we'll convert that. But if it's not available, if it's, for example, available only on paper, or maybe your system is not yet outputting the worksheet or the CSV file, and the software vendor is working on it, but you want to get the data in now, so we can work with you, and we'll give you a workbook for you to fill in the data. We'll even, if need be, we can make arrangements to take your data and we'll fill in the data for you if you have it on paper and you don't want to take the time to fill in the thousands of records that you'd have to fill in. We can make arrangements for that. And however we get the data, whether it's the way you have it now or from the workbook you'll complete or that we'll complete for you, we will convert the data and we'll submit the file through the gateway. And then we present the links. It's really the main link at the top of the page, the FDA ACA Success 4 homepage. It's really all you need. The other 3 links I'm just putting there for your convenience, but they're all available directly from the ACA Success 4 homepage at the bottom. And that completes
hey, Howard,
my
thanks.
presentation. Yeah.
Great job, Howard. I think that that covered a lot of material in a fairly short period of time, and I hope we answered a lot of questions. But Vincent, there must be some questions that are up in the queue.
Yeah, there are a couple available here.
Excellent.
And there's a couple more coming in now that we have finished that. Let's see. One of the first ones that came in was after July 1st, will existing NDC Labeler codes need to be re-registered or re-requested with the new NDC NHRIC Labeler Code Request form?
The short answer for that is no. The longer answer is, in general, most of this stuff, the FDA does not, as they change their requirements, they do not ask that you resubmit files. So definitely you do not need to do it for this change and for most other changes. It may be that with this active ingredient, active moiety, that may be different, but all this other stuff that they change along the way, they don't require resubmission unless and until the information actually changes.
Okay, and sort of following up off of that, is there a change to be required in date for resubmission of NDC Labeler Code SPL after receiving Labeler Code from FDA?
Right. Yeah, that's the thing. I kind of object to. It's called the request form, but it's really not. It's really the registration form. When the FDA assigns the labeler code to you, you need to submit the exact same SPL file that you did before, but add the labeler code. Yeah, that should be the only change you make, is to include the labeler code. Once you've done that, you've then completed the task. It doesn't end when the FDA assigns you the labeler code. It ends when you submit the SPL with the labeler code.
Okay. Let's see. When we are doing SPL for older products for the first time, which is already on the market, what date should be given in the SPL?
What date? Yeah, that use your best judgment. Again, they're not researching this. They don't mean for it to be a research exercise, but use a reasonable start marketing date, appropriate. If it's in the case of an approved drug, perhaps you want to use the date of the approval, but just use your best judgment as to when the start marketing date is, and then be aware that it doesn't go out before that date. So.
If you have different contract manufacturers for an over-the-counter, do they need to list, or do you? Must they use your labeler?
Right. Yeah. I'm not sure I understood the last part of that question. If they use different contract manufacturers and they're all carrying they can all carry the same NDC, as long as all of the information is correct for that particular product. So, for example, if you're making pills, and the ones that have made by one manufacturer have an L on the imprint, and the ones made by a different manufacturer have a Z, that's a different product characteristic. So you would need to have separate the regulations. Again, this is something you would discuss with the EDRLS group if it's a problem. But by the regulations, they are supposed to have separate product codes because they have separate product characteristics. But if you're making a powder, that exact same powder, the exact same strength, and it's the same. So so presumably everything else about it is the same for both manufacturers. You can use the same NDC. And the way the FDA is working it now is that the labeler code for the drug product listing needs to be the labeler code for the distributor. They've been, if the manufacturer is listed with their own labeler code, but it's the final drug product listing, then the FDA will send a letter saying, no, 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 we want the distributor's labeler code associated with it.
We have 2 approved products on the market. After some time, we've received approval from FDA for the 3rd strength. Which would be the marketing date for that?
Okay, so again, if it's a different strength, it's a different product. So you can have a separate start marketing date. The recommendation, and this actually came up with one of our clients very recently, is that submit the label with the 3rd strength, with that start marketing date. But be aware that let me give you a better picture. If you've made a change to the existing labeling that's out there, and you're now going to be adding this 3rd strain in the future, submit an SPL now with only the 2 strains that have some labeling change in there that you want to get listed. And then after you've done that, then submit the same label with the 3rd strain, that has a start marketing date in the future, in order to get that one listed. I hope that's clear to everybody.
Let's see. We are a custom manufacturer. We are doing registration on behalf of our customer. Should we use our labeler code or the customer's?
Again, for final drug product listing, you should use the company that you're manufacturing for. Their labeler code should be on the final product. You should, the FDA does want the manufacturers to list the products that they manufacture, but they want those with the marketing category of drug manufactured exclusively for private label distributor, or drug for further processing, depending on what cases. But the listings by the manufacturers with the manufacturer's label code will not be made public. The final drug product listing for an OTC product or for a human prescription drug product is supposed to be done with the distributor's labeler code, not the manufacturer's.
Does the FDA require electronic submission of old products pre-SPL that require no change?
The short answer to that is no. The longer answer is if it's being imported into the United States, they're tightening up on the importing of these drug products, and it's very helpful to have the drug product listing. Also, if the drug product is subject to reimbursement by the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services, then you need to be in the NDC directory. In the new, let me rephrase that, in the new NDC directory, which contains only the drugs that have been listed using SPL. So if you're in that situation as well, if you're manufacturing it domestically, you don't have an import situation, but it is reimbursable by CMS, then you should list it using SPL. Otherwise, healthcare providers will have a difficult, if not impossible, time getting reimbursement for those drugs.
Where and when should the business operations import and U.S. agent in the drop-down table be an SPL?
Well, the U.S. agent has to be there. Okay, that's a given. You cannot have a foreign establishment without a U.S. agent. The importer should be shown. If you know that you're importing to a site, you should put it down, but they have no way of checking, to see that all of the imports are listed. But they can check if you don't have if you don't have a U.S. agent listed. That will be an automatic validation error, and if you list 2 U.S. agents, that will be an automatic validation error. So just make sure you have one U.S. agent, one and only one U.S. agent.
This is regarding the ACA 6004. If no samples are distributed, are we required to submit a form that says no samples were distributed?
Not that I'm aware of. That's an interesting question. You know, the FDA has said that they'll be issuing more guidance about this, and maybe they'll cover that if you distributed in the past but you haven't distributed this year. But documentation I've seen does not discuss that at all. So my thinking is that the answer is no, but that's subject to change.
If my company is a DMF holder and the manufacturer of active ingredients is, and the manufacturer of the active ingredient is a different company, do we need establishment registration? If yes, does the establishment registration refer to the company or to the active ingredient?
Well, yeah, the establishment registration would be the company manufacturing the active ingredient. If you're going to list the FDA wants you to list the manufacturer of the API, the active product ingredient, and as the API manufacturer. And if they're not registered with the FDA, that will be a validation error for you. So the regulations require that the active product ingredient, that the active ingredient manufacturer register as an establishment, and it may have practical implications if you want to list your. If they don't register, and the company selling the drug wants to include them as an establishment, they won't be able to. Now, let me qualify that. If the active product ingredient manufacturer is listed, but only as a manufacturer, not as an API, you can list them as a manufacturer. But if you want to list them as the API and they're not listed as an API manufacturer, registered as an API manufacturer, only as a manufacturer, you can speak to them and see if they can do it as an API manufacturer. Again, you know, there are rules for SPL, but there's also a purpose to this. The FDA, for whatever reason, wants to know who's manufacturing the drug and who's manufacturing the active product ingredient. So the more accurate the information is that they have in terms of drug safety, the better off we probably all are. So, yeah, so it would be good if they could register as an API manufacturer, not just manufacturer, but it's not required that they do that.
Is it required to get a new DUNS number if you move locations?
But that's up to Dun & Bradstreet if they require that. But the address is associated with the Dun & Bradstreet number. So if you move your location and you put your new address in and Dun & Bradstreet doesn't know about it, you're going to get a validation error. And the FDA will want you to update that with Dun & Bradstreet.
Is the ACA 6004 drug sample reporting applicable to homeopathic pharmaceuticals as well?
That's a regulatory question. I think it's just the ones that require doctor's prescription. So if it doesn't require that, I don't think it is. And that's one of those questions. If you want to get the official FDA answer, check with the EDRLS at fda.hhs.gov. They will give you the definitive answer on that.
When submitting a SPL, are all images of each strength required or not?
Yes, for strengths, images are required for each strength, but the rule that the FDA has, the regulation is that you need to submit a representative sample. Now, representative sample means that if you have two labels, let's say you have a bottle, and a bottle's in a carton, and you're listing both. You have the bottle level of packaging and the carton level of packaging. If the bottle label has the exact same text as is on the carton label, then you only need to submit the carton label, or one of those, I should say, one of those two images. And you should only, not that you only need to, but the FDA wants you to submit just one image for those two labels that have the exact same text. If the text, if you have two bottles of the exact same strength, but one has 30 tablets and one has 100 tablets, but otherwise the text is the same other than stuff related to quantity. So for example, if you have the NDC on both bottles, and the NDCs obviously differ if they have two different quantities, the FDA still only wants one image because it's the same strength, it's just a difference in quantity. However, when it's two bottles, both of 30 tablets, but one is of 5 milligrams and one is 10 milligrams, you then need, and everything is the exact same except for the strength, you need to have two images, one for each strength. I hope that is clear, but I'm just telling you what the rules are, doing my best to explain it. But I know this gets a little bit complicated. But again, different strengths mean you need to have separate images for each strength. But within each strength, you may only need one image for a whole slew of containers, as long as the text is identical, except for the quantity in the container.
In private labeler distributor drug listing, who is registrant drug manufacturer or distributor?
Who should do the question is who should do the listing? Work it out between the labeler and the manufacturer. Again, if the labeler does it themselves, they leave the registrant blank. If the manufacturer does the registering for the labeler, then they put themselves down as a registrant as well as the establishment, but the labeler is still the labeler. But we have, in our experience, companies are working among themselves, particularly for the for smaller companies that are distributing things that are manufactured by others. They're really in the business of selling drugs, not making them. It seems to be, in our experience, that they're having the manufacturers do it. Perhaps, from what I hear, it's there may be charges associated with by the manufacturer to do that for them. But the FDA wants a listing, and it's a question as to who. The question as to who does the listing is up between the labeler and the distributor, and the labeler and the manufacturer. But somebody better list it.
Will the FDA provide SPL X form for ACA reporting?
I haven't heard that. So far they've only issued, the instruction guide for how to produce the SPL. Whether or not they'll do it, I was just on a call with the SPL working group yesterday, and no mention was made about that. But it could be that they will.
What is considered a counter-ion? If we have a sodium chloride solution and sodium chloride is our active ingredient, are we not supposed to be choosing sodium ion and chloride ion as active moieties?
Well, in those cases, they're ions. So I'm not in this. This is really something requiring scientific expertise that I do not possess. But generally, the rule is if something is the active moiety is the part of the ingredient that makes the drug effective. So if it's the sodium or it's the chloride, that's what makes it effective, so that's the ion. The other part of it is added for a number of different reasons. It may help in the manufacturing process. It may help in the deliver the ingredient, again, assuming sodium is the actual moiety, then the chloride may be added just to deliver the sodium to make it effective. But you just have to know what it is, and this worksheet, this validation list that the FDA is developing will help companies. I know that that's a complicated question that was just asked. It's been pointed out to me that if you look, if you know where to look, you'll find drugs, tablet form, capsule form. They have different active ingredients, but they share the same active moiety. So it's the active moiety that's making the drug effective. It's not the entire ingredient, and that's as much as I can explain. I hope that clears up the confusion there.
Once I have submitted a drug listing to the FDA and the information has not changed, do I need to submit it every year, or do I just re-register every year?
The re-register, I assume, is referring to establishment registration. That is correct. There is a misconception, and it costs us business, but it is what it is. The FDA does not want you to submit a drug just for the sake of submitting the drug. The regulations state that if nothing has changed in the drug, there's no need to send an update to the FDA. So yeah, so if the drug hasn't changed, don't submit it, but do make sure you submit an annual, at least an annual establishment registration. And again, to keep the information current, if anything in that information changes during the course of the year, the contact has changed, you close down a plant or whatever, please update your establishment registration with that information.
Sometimes FDA provides generic drug template and exclusivity statement, but in SPL schema, there's no provision for such text and validation error occurs. In this case, what would you do?
Repeat the question again.
FDA provides generic drug template and exclusivity statements, but in SPL schema, there is no provision for that text.
Yeah, so if there's no provision for it, if you can't work it into the SPL, don't put it in, and speak to the EDRLS group if that's an issue. They can also contact SPL at fda.hhs.gov if it's just a matter of getting that into the SPL itself. I haven't heard of that question before, so I'm not familiar with what the issue that they're having. But if it's a regulatory issue, check with the EDRLS. If it's just a technical issue, you want to know how to use the X forms or whatever to get it in, and check with the FDA, with SPL at fda.hhs.gov.
Okay. Are there any benefits to registering a dietary supplement SPL? Will this eventually become mandatory?
The second part of the question is for the FDA. I haven't heard anything about it becoming mandatory. We had a client who recently listed it. I asked why they were listing it. I mean, it's not required, but we can do it, But just I was to add to my knowledge base. I said, why are you doing it? Well, they were doing it because their client, they were producing it for somebody else, and the client wanted it listed. So, okay, They didn't have a business reason to do it other than to make their client happy.
What is the best tool to create ACA XML?
Well, come to DCL and we'll do it for you. But if that's a generic question about any XML tool. I don't know if anybody's come out with an XML add-in for XML Spy or Oxygen or any of these other XML tools, or maybe I mean, there are other software vendors out there. They may be planning to produce add-ons, but I'm not aware of it.
Okay, and we've got time for this one last one. If an SPL is submitted with a marketing start date of 1 month in advance, and the company submits a new SPL with a later marketing start date, shouldn't the second SPL override the first?
It will on the date that the assumption is, well, let's rephrase that. Right now, if you're using the same set ID, just a later version number, that should be true. Yes.
Okay. Then that's it. Any other questions? I'll be forwarding to you guys, and you can get back to everyone through email.
Wait, just one quick footnote to that question. But if the SPL is already on the Daily Med, it doesn't override it at that point. What's on the Daily Med stays on the Daily Med until the date. Okay, so if in other words, if the first one is submitted with the date a month in advance, and 2 weeks later you submit a later one, the later submission will override the first one. But if you have it 30 days in advance, and on the 31st day you submitted an SPL with a later marketing date, the one that's on the Daily Med will stay there until that later marketing date. So you would have to go through a delisting and then a relisting.
All right.
Great. Well, thank you, Howard, for your insightfulness, and Vincent, thank you for moderating the Q&A. Please feel free to reach out to either Howard or myself if we can be of any assistance in either your SPL needs or your drug sample reporting needs. I was looking at a number of the questions, and there's quite a few questions here that we didn't get to. If you feel your organization can benefit from some focused time with Howard, we can set up sessions that are specific to your regulatory requirements and consult with you remotely that way. And Howard, do you have anything to add before we leave?
No, that's nothing to add beyond that.
Great. Well, we're really excited that you could all join. There's still a tremendous amount of folks still on the line at the end of the presentation, which is always a good sign. And we had a very high percentage of the folks that registered attend, and quite a few folks who had to drop off early asking about the presentation. The presentation has been recorded. It will be up on our website in the next day or two. And if you go to www.dclab.com, you'll see a link off towards the right, I believe, that has webinars, and the recorded sessions will be in there. So with that, I want to thank you all for giving us an hour and a half of your time today. And